Welcome to the Nehemiah Entrepreneurship Community Podcast. I'm your host, Patrice Sage, and today is my good friend, Jeff Shafer. Jeff, how are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here, and if I'm a little bright, it's because Orlando is sunny today, but it's probably a little bit contrast from where you're at, Patrice. Is it sunny or is it rainy in the Pacific Northwest?
Are you? But here's the thing, though: you cannot beat Portland, Vancouver, July, August.
I know.
So in about 15 days, man, we're gonna be. You're gonna beg me for mercy for you're gonna want me to invite you to the region. So
no kidding. I love Oregon, as you know. I grew up there, so get me out of Orlando in about 2 weeks.
That's right. Well, we are continuing our discussions on our response to the George Floyd incident. We are now in part 12. We've had a number of guests. So you are the 12th guest, Jeff, and we intentionally having different views and different perspective to give our listeners and our viewers more than just sound bites, to have them introspect. So today we're going to focus on the economic end and entrepreneurship. And when I tell you about Jeff, you understand exactly why we have Jeff come on board to talk about it. Jeff, we've had a number of your friends here on the podcast, and they've shared some very good perspective. And let's see if you can keep up with them, because it's been fun having you. I know you'll do well. Well, so let me introduce Jeff Shafer to you so that you might know who we have with us. And of course, you're free to provide feedbacks and comments or questions as we go through the podcast today. Jeff is the CEO and the co-founder of CommonGood Capital, where he sets the strategic direction and leads the team on this exciting journey of transforming investors, businesses, financial markets, and the world through the power of stewardship and capital. Jeff had worked for CNL prior to this for 18 and a half years, helping them raise over $9 billion, and went on to become president of one of their major division. Jeff also is a graduate of Rollins College. He has an MBA from Rollins College. Jeff played basketball when he was in college. He has the height for it and the skills for it. Also, one thing about Jeff is that he has a strong, unique passion for the ex-offender community. As a matter of fact, what led him to start CommonGood Capital was initially part of his desire to have a resource or an economic engine that would eventually lead him to doing something unique for the ex-offender population. Jeff is also on the advisory board of the Nehemiah Project. He's one of our 100K advisory board members. He's also on the board of Elevation Foundation. Actually, you are the chairman of the board, right, Jeff?
Yep.
Of Elevation Foundation. So Jeff has a mix of business and philanthropy blend. Jeff is known by the Nehemiah community as hosting the annual Nehemiah barbecue in Orlando, Florida. But Jeff, we're no longer in Florida for our annual conference, so we miss your home, my friend.
Yep. We miss having you here.
Yes, Jeff, I want you to know we had your brother also. Your brother was part of our forum, our Africa forum that we held about 30 days ago, focusing on Africa business and kingdom business there and helping them deal with post-COVID-19. And he did a good job. So I want you to know your little brother represented the Shafer family well. Well, Jeff, thanks for being here with us. So, Jeff, I asked you to come to our studio because you and I had a conversation about impact investing and its role in midst of this chaos, in midst of this social unrest, in midst of even COVID-19, and the power of impact investing, what it can do as part of the solution, as we look
Right.
at how do we empower urban communities. But before we get to that, what's your take on what's happened with this George Floyd situation, and how do you think the nation is responding to it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say the situation is and was tragic. And candidly, it's I'm careful of how I talk about this because I don't want to offend anybody on any side. And being transparent, being a white guy, I'm in a very precarious place if I say the wrong vernacular, the wrong thing. But let me just say this. It's tragic. Clearly, this is an issue. We need to resolve this police brutality. But I also would say, taking one example, two examples, four examples, I don't care what the examples are, whether they're positive or negative, I don't think should create the collective narrative. So when I looked through this, through the whole thing, it just reminded me of human brokenness. And I also understand how this instance is unbelievably charged with anger and with hurt. And I also see how it can be very divisive. And part of it is because, I mean, even having the right language to talk about it is difficult. So, the response, look, we need to figure these types of situations out. One of the reasons why I do think America is great, despite its flaws, is that we have laws and we have process. So I would love to see the process play out. I would love for those who need to be accountable be held accountable. But I also don't subscribe to throwing the baby out with the bathwater on everything. And ultimately, I think if this becomes a catalyst for further discussions, then let's hope that we can make something good out of this scenario. But I understand why everybody is hurting over this, and I understand the divisiveness. And I would love to just see more commonality to figure out practically how you move forward. The last thing I want to say on that is, and part of this is my upbringing. And I'm a psych major by background, as a biblical studies major. Words are important and they matter. But where I find, and I'm not somebody who's lacking words, but I think in today's world, and I think where I'm resting on is less about words, although we need to listen. Frankly, we need to see action. And so to me, I think actions will speak louder than words. And that's where my focus is today, is how do we move beyond this? And how do we make actions and actionable things so that we're moving in the right direction? So I'll stop there, Patrice, unless you have any follow-up on that.
Yes, thank you. Well, you and we're going to get into the action because you raised a good point. You read Nehemiah Project's response. What are your thoughts about our response?
Yeah, when I read it, and again, I can only comment from the viewpoint of my lens, my experience, which we don't have time to go into that. But I over the weekend, before you guys had sent this out, I had spent watching a bunch of videos, reading, frankly, apologizing to friends, trying to get my arms around this situation. And well, I'm sure we'll talk about this later. I think the situation is bigger than even what we're talking about here right now. But when I read your response, I was the real hope came through my being, which I needed at the moment. And I think here's why. One, the way you talked even about the George Floyd instance, there was hurt and humility around the whole scenario. It wasn't blaming, yet it clearly said, hey, here's some issues here. And then I think to hear you talk about, hey, we started as a Black organization, and you went through that whole thing. And then just to hear you say, and again, I'm not excusing or unvalidating what people have experienced, but to hear you say, from a ministry standpoint, we've experienced America in a different way. And so it made me go, okay, maybe we're not all evil and bad, and this thing isn't just corrupt through and through. So I think that was very helpful. But then I think the second thing, which goes to my comment I made earlier, the language that you are speaking, which is why I'm involved with Nehemiah, is practical and actionable. And I think one of the things that cuts through this, and by the way, there are a myriad of solutions and things that need to get done, but this idea of entrepreneurship, of a job, the value of work is so underestimated across the globe. And yet, this idea of creating jobs, of having good jobs to go to using your God-given gifts to be creative, to be an innovative, is really the message that at the core of what you guys are doing, obviously from a biblical perspective. And so to the extent that we can continue to build that, I see a ton of hope, because if you just look at mathematically where we spend our time as individuals is heavily at work. And I think work today is viewed in the word work, which is more negative. And in reality, if people can find a place where they feel like they're human flourishing, while it may not eliminate all the problems we have, I'll promise you it'd be a better world to live in.
Oh, wow. Thanks for that. If you haven't read our response, it's right there on your what if you're watching through Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever medium you're watching through, is right there. Also, you can find it on our website at nehemiahproject.org or nehemiahecommunity.com. And of course, if you're watching this much later and you're wondering what in the world is a George Floyd situation, you can always read about it on our website and go from there. So, Jeff, you made a point about the hope. Speak to our audience a bit. I think sometimes our audience, not our audience, some of our audience, some members of the Black community, may not understand the importance of making sure that in the midst of stating the problem, or also stating the good things that are happening. Why is that important for white persons like yourself to hear it balanced? Because I think that sometimes goes, and a part of it is there's a sense that, Jeff, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about the system. But so why is it that why is that important for you as a white male? Particularly when we talk about the blame in America, a lot of time the white male is the number one villain. I mean, that's just the reality. Why is it important for you, being that you often perceive as the number one villain, and that's just the way things are postured language wise, and sometimes almost like you're a symbol, but white male are real people, aren't they?
Yeah. And I would say, let's just go to white male for a second. In my career, I've come across thousands of executives and people in the business. And by numbers, there are a lot of white males in those positions. And I have seen, and this is, forget about color here. I've seen people do amazing things, and they are doing amazing things. So for me, and again, I know they're saying it's not me, but when you hear the rhetoric over and over again, and frankly, you can flip this on both sides, you feel like it's hard not to say it's my fault. It's hard not to say, oh my gosh, there's nothing I can do. And when I look at it from my own perspective, and this is not patting myself on the back at all, and I don't know the exact math, I'm probably involved with 4 to 5 different ministries, and all of them in some way are poverty, distressed communities, and somehow they touch on race. And so, I know the amount of time and energy that I put into this. And when you hear that rhetoric, you just start to say, well, why am I wasting my time doing this? I'm not only spending my time, I'm spending money. My family's getting engaged, and then people are saying everything is horrible and there's no hope. Well, then forget it. I'm going to go back to my own world, in my own little bubble, and isolate myself. Well, the irony is there's no joy in that either. So look, I have emotions just like everybody else. And then the other thing is, I see some wonderful people across all different races who are doing amazing things. And I think if we squash that, fortunately, people are strong enough. It just is a disincentive to keep pushing through these barriers. Look, even being on this call today, there's a side to me that says, why do I want to put myself out there? I may say something that's wrong. I may offend somebody. It may come back and hurt my business. I mean, I know where my heart is. And yet I also know I'm called to be in this dialogue. And if I offend somebody, then I offend somebody. But hopefully there's healing. And if there's stuff I need to change, then I'm willing to change as well.
And I do appreciate you coming here and with that courage, because you do have something that I think is very valuable that I want to talk about, that the mainstream, at least in the Christian space, do not understand its power. And definitely in the urban space, may have limited exposure to it. And if they do, I think they would appreciate what you got to say about that. But, what's interesting about this situation, as you talk about a lot of men and women of goodwill, white and black, who are doing wonderful things. What's interesting about this situation with George Floyd is that it harnessed a movement that wasn't just made up of black people. A lot of whites are involved, young people, adults. And I mean, I've heard across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats talk about how enough is enough. Right. And this kind of almost, it struck a chord among everybody. And it's almost, I literally had a friend of mine call me, white, and we rarely talk. He's a client, an old client. And he called me, says, and literally he said this. I said, hey, what's up? He said, we talked a little bit, chit-chatted, and then he said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He said, I want to talk about the George Floyd thing, because as I heard and saw that, I thought about you. Has that ever happened to you? I mean, he literally, and then he just got emotional, and he began to talk about, as I went through. This is not an emotional guy, by the way. He's a hunter. I mean, he's a real man's man. So it struck a chord. Now, 29 years ago, Rodney King, in California, a similar situation, even more physically brutal. He didn't die, obviously. It led to riots, but it didn't create this kind of national cross-racial movement. What do you think is different between the George Floyd incident and the Rodney King incident 29 years later?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm 46, so I was around or alive during that time period. I do remember it. I think there's a number of things. One of it is if you just isolate it to the last, and it's way bigger than this, but you just even isolate it to the last, call it 4 months. You have the whole COVID situation, you have isolation, you have people losing jobs. I think there was real fear in that. I think there was, obviously there's been, and in the world that I live in, unfortunately, COVID is disproportionately hurting lower to middle income earners in a massive way. So I think you have that factoring into it. I think you have social media that's into it. And then I think the other thing is you have people who are tired of this. I mean, that was 29 years ago. Have we not moved past this? And so I think you put all those, into a crock pot, and it's a heated thing. I'm going to actually go one step further, and this may be a bit controversial. but it falls into the world that I live in, and I think this narrative of what we're going through in this real life is even a broader than just racial reconciliation or issues like that are clearly needed. I actually think that there is this tug of war right now, and it's been going on for some time, really between socialist type thinking and capitalism. And I think, one of the things that's fed into this is you've seen the greed and kind of some of the real negatives to capitalism, over the last 10, 15 years. Just go back to the dot-com bubble, go to the global financial crisis. And, those were caused by these excesses, the negative of Wall Street, CEOs making $1 zillion and yet, not even being there very long. And yet what's interesting about where the environment we live today, especially because of COVID, you are actually seeing, capital being viewed in a little bit more positive light. The PPP loans, people recognizing that you need capital in the system. So I actually think there's a broader discussion that needs to be incorporated, and it's really this tug of war, I think, between socialism and capitalism, and what hopefully we'll get to in a little bit. I do think capitalism has caused some real pains and hurts, but it's also had amazing innovation, and if you just look at the wealth that has been created at all levels, although there continues to be a gap. And so, to me, the journey that I'm called on to is really, and I don't use this term in the business day to day. I've used it in the past, but it's really trying to redeem capitalism. And so that's the context for which I view a lot of this narrative. And that's not to say that it's simply economic, because I think it's more than that. So to me, that's why this is a bigger issue today than it was 29 years ago, at least in the media and everything that we're dealing with.
Yeah. And you mentioned this aspect as well, but I want to just reemphasize it. I think part of it also reflects our social progress.
Yep.
Because for whites and blacks to take up arms collectively, and for whites to say, you know what, I'm tired of this. What can I do to make sure that, because I think for a long time, a lot of whites really did not see, nor even in certain cases, really believe in the pain that a lot of blacks were going through.
Right.
And now, for whatever reason, somehow this has exposed it to the surface in the way that a lot of whites are saying, you know what, wait a minute, does this happen to you? I've heard so many people say, hey, I don't think about it that way. Why should you have to think about it that way just because you're black? So I think we have to celebrate that. I want to make a point of that, because I think in midst of all, as horrible as this looks like, we ought to celebrate the fact that America's consciousness, the civility, the Patrice and the Jeffs and the Johnson and the Mike and the whoever you name them, the American citizenry, the citizens are saying, you know what, we're tired of it. Let's change. It's actually trying to impose something. It's the people saying, what can we do about it?
Yeah. And just to add to that, so I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday who's a black man, and just hearing him talk about, he's got 4 or 5 kids, and 2 of them are boys, and then just even to hear him say that the dialogues that he has to have with his sons in regards to safety and that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, you hear it and it's like, this is awful. It should not be this way. I don't have those same discussions with my son, and there's no question that collectively we're saying this has got to stop. I think generally we all believe that we are equal, But I think how that gets played out on a day-to-day basis, it just looks different. And I know that it spurred a lot of conversations on my side on all different circles. And for that, I don't know how you can't. Well, I can see how you could not go forward. But if you have half a heart, there's a way forward, and I think we're going to figure it out.
Wow. And this is part of why we're doing this podcast, because I think I want to make sure that our audience, the Nehemiah family, hear from different whites and blacks, different perspectives, and also hear the fact that there are the Jeffs out there. It's not just, because sometimes we'll blame the system or say
Right.
white people. We're not talking about specific persons, and it's so easy then to feed into the racial narrative.
Right.
But when we hear real people beyond sound bites, we can say, wait a minute, we have made progress. But Jeff, we're going to have a guest here this week who sent me a text the other day, and I invited him to the podcast, African-American. And he would say, someone like him would say, and I don't mean to put you in a spot to hands for all white people, but
Sure.
since you're white, he would say, but Patrice, this has been happening for a long time. Why is it all of a sudden whites are all of a sudden aware? In other words, why haven't them heard us before? What do you say to that? I mean, because people like him, they feel like, well, because part of people, there are some people who are cynical still. And they feel like, yeah, but if Jeff truly loved me, how come he didn't see it before? What do you say to that? Is that a fair take or is that unfair?
Again, I can only respond in my own experience and from my own lens. And this isn't a new discussion to me. I've absolutely known about it. And again, let's go beyond color. By the way, I think another issue is to go beyond color. I think a lot of this is what plays into this in a massive way is the socioeconomic status of individuals. I don't care what color you are. And I say that because, I've been going into the prison system for 20, 25 years on and off. And I will tell you, every color is represented there. And I do know the numbers and I'm aware of all that. But I will tell you, I've been exposed to that all day long. And so I've known about it. And I'm actually, in my family, are doing things. So I don't think, at least in my case, this isn't a new thing for me. I would suspect for a lot of people it isn't. I would suspect, and my gut is just even as I talk to people. So my son and daughter both, one's a senior and one's going to be a freshman in college. Their upbringing, they did go to a private school, but it was diverse. My son has friends. He's friends with all different types of nationalities. And so for him, I wonder how he would answer that. I'll have to ask him that. But he's a different thing. Now, I will tell you generally, I've talked to some older people and there is a little different narrative. So again, I think it's dangerous to paint one picture that this is new. Because at least amongst a lot of my own experience and friends and family, this wouldn't be new. And again, in my family, I've got a brother who lives in Africa. I've got my sister has 3 adopted girls and her own biologic. 2 are from Haiti and 1 is from Africa. So again, that's why I think it's very dangerous. Because those of us who, at least are more integrated and try to live differently, this narrative is painful. And frankly, it's extremely painful for me to know that my fellow Americans or citizens are going through this pain, and yet I don't know how to fix it. So there's no joy at all maybe this is a male, I want to fix it. And so when I have friends that are hurting, when I talk to my buddy and he's telling me this, I've got another friend of mine, and it's actually a prominent case. So I'm gonna be very vague, but his son, Black, was killed by an officer in California. I'll leave it at that. And I talked to him. I've been talking to him for a year. I ask him what's going on, and these are people who are friends who are feeling the effects of this on a day-to-day basis. So, anyways, long-winded answer, but I don't think it's new, at least in the circle that I run in.
Yeah. So it seems like the social media and has just projected it to the forefront now.
Yeah.
Having a conversation. Here's what Brian, thank you for your comment. Brian just made a post here. He says, thanks for the honest conversation about this topic. You had lots of great questions. I enjoyed listening to the dialogue. Thank you so much for that, Brian. Again, if you're enjoying this dialogue, we want you guys to share with others, because we got to move beyond sound bites and get to real people, real discussion to understand. And these are entrepreneurs for the most part that we have on this podcast, except for the pastors and the politicians. But for this purpose, mainly entrepreneurs, because we want to talk about the real situation. So now, Jeff, let's kind of make a transition here. So you were in a very good position at CNL, very good position, well paid. You rose the rank, one of the highest paid in the company. You led to, you led them to raise $9 billion or $9 billion. You were president of one of the major divisions, and you made a decision to start over, quit your job to start a new business in impact investing. And part of your motivation was this passion about prison ministry, about looking at finance, capital from a transformative perspective. And part of it for you also was about looking at things like poverty and just those who are, you understand, you were tired of bringing capital to those who it just makes them richer. And then you kind of wanted to play a role in using capital transformatively.
Right.
Along the way, as a startup, you also have maintained a commitment to Nehemiah Project, both as a donor as well as an advisor. You've also involved with Elevation Foundation. So you've kept your philanthropy even as a startup. And guys, if you know anything about startup businesses in the financial world, it's very capital intensive. So you're leading, and I remember talking to your wife about your decision, because I also happen to be Jeff's coach. And as we talked about it, about the implication that it might mean changing lifestyle. What if it doesn't work? And your wife says, we are in this. So going from the ivory tower to coming down to where commoners like us are, to kind of create this lift. I'm embarrassing Jeff here. First, what's the motivation? Because you were doing this way before the George Floyd incident. It's been a personal commitment, prison ministry, all of that. And I always ask, I said, what in the world? When I look at your background, there's no prison in your background, no family member. No, I said, what's Jeff doing in the prison ministry? But so what's the motivation? It seemed to be part of the core mission for you and your wife, these things. So what drove you to that? And then we're going to get into what you're doing and how it can be helped.
Yeah, let me tackle this in two ways. So in college, I was introduced to prison ministry, and that has become a calling on my life in differing ways over the last 25 years. When people ask me, what's the intrigue with prison ministry? I have kind of two answers. One is God put it in my heart, and that is probably the most real and most honest answer. But the second thing is you go in and talk to these men. And by the way, I've been into women prisons as well. The hardest is the juvenile prisons. I've only been into one, but I've been into maximum security prisons in a number of states. But you listen to the story, you sit across the table, and you have a meal with them. I mean, we ate, we were in their cells, and you hear their story, and I'll never forget, grace became real to me in the prison system, because if I had grown up in a lot of these situations, like a lot of these guys had, I probably would be in the same spot. And so one of the things that was impressed upon me as a 18-year-old going into the prison system was, unless you can view yourself as an inmate, you'll never understand what grace really means. See, I'm just as evil as somebody in there who's done, you name it. Unfortunately, my heart is just as dark. Now, maybe I haven't acted out on it in the same way, but I'm no different. So that's one thing as it relates to the prison, and that is a deep passion of mine, and I'm anxious to see how God's going to weave that in a much bigger way. But I would say for us, for my wife and I, it was probably 7, 8 years ago, we were on this journey of what does it mean to be a steward. And by the way, we'd asked this before, but what did it mean to be a steward of our time, our talent, and our treasure? And I'm sure you all have heard that phrase before. The difference is this time we attacked it as a couple, and we thought about it holistically. Now, it wasn't like we sat one day, sat around for 2 hours, thought through the stuff, and came up with answers. This is probably over a year to 2 to 3 year time period. And so, but I think when you address your time, your talent, and treasures as a steward, that, hey, this is not something that is mine. It's not something that, sure, I put work into it, whether that be my time, talent, or treasure. When you start from this perspective of God has allowed any ability that I have, it comes from him. Same with my wife. Any treasure that we have comes from him. And by the way, when that treasure is not yours, when your capital is not yours, then it forces you to start asking questions of, well, then how should I be thinking about it? And so that's where when I woke up after a back surgery when I was 40, that was part of the question, is you say, wait, Lord, you've given some capital over here into these accounts. If they're not mine, what am I supposed to be doing with it? And for my wife and I, yeah, we could have just left it in there and kept earning and build this big old nest egg. But God called us to say, go risk it. And one of the things that I had to get over was, and again, this is just for me, I'm not recommending this for anybody else, was when you look at the parable of the talents, what you realize that we're in this parable where there was discussed was when the money was just put, buried. There was no risk taken. And so for us, what I had to come to realization is because I grew up in a world, in the financial world, it's all about risk and reward. Gotta be careful about that. And what was impressed upon me was, no, Jeff and Shelley, your job is to be faithful. The risk part, when it's not your money to start out with, it's not your risk. My job is to be faithful. Now, on the best of days, I'm congruent here and here on that. On the worst of days, I'm not. But ultimately, that's where God has called us to say, hey, we've given you guys some talents. We've given you guys some resources. He's implanted different things into our heart. And so we're doing our best to live out on that. And one of them is ultimately trying to use capital as a redeeming agent, not only for the way the capital can be invested and what it can impact, but actually where I'm also extremely intrigued and motivated is when you start to invest with an open hand, when it's not just about what return I'm going to get or we're going to get, but it's also of how that capital is impacting others in the community. There is just a joy and a freedom in investing that we've experienced that I never had prior to that. And so I think capital is a tool, and it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And so to the extent that we can get people thinking differently about their capital, thinking differently about their work, that's what my wife and I are trying to do in as small or bigger ways as possible.
I love it. Let me ask this question for our coaches. I'm certifying a group of coaches right now through our coaches certificate. By the way, if you want to be a Kingdom Business Coach, reach out to us because we have a comprehensive training program for those who want to coach entrepreneurs from a Kingdom perspective. Just go to our website; you can learn more about it. And so, Jeff, I'm taking a group of coaches, and I always use you as one of the example of clients that I've worked with about moving from. You remember the example I gave you about the one mountain that you had climbed very successfully,
right?
And then the other mountain that you're looking to climb, and I'm gonna have actually my coaches watch this video, and I've told them I'm gonna have you come to the class. I want them to hear about how do you help a Jeff move to the other mountain, and so and I didn't believe you could do it. I didn't believe that you're gonna walk away because as I shared with you that going up is easier than coming down the mountain because gravity is working against you. Right? You did it. So real quick, how difficult was that for you once you made the decision? And how has it been now trying to climb up this other mountain, though as righteous as this other mountain is in terms of alignment and calling? It's not that the other one was evil, but it's just a great alignment.
It was hard. It was, it challenged me at every level. What I didn't realize was, while I would have thought that my identity didn't come through work, it did. I had a wife who was unbelievably supportive, but it still hurt. It stripped me down to very little. I mean, you go from managing 150 people and yada, yada, yada. You're there for almost 20 years. You leave a week from then. I mean, they care about you, but not really. I mean, they care about you, but it's great. They've moved on to another leader. So it was very difficult. I will tell you, by the grace of God, I had coaches around me. I had, and that was pivotal. And I would have said, look, I would have felt like, I got an MBA. We're always doing professional development. I can just try to figure this out on my own. And that was a misnomer. So having people around you who can support you was critical. And I had a wife and family who's very supportive. And then I had business coaches, and obviously, Patrice, you were one of them. And in the Valley, it was not easy. I mean, it was tough. And I'm out of the Valley, but I am trudging up that hill. But I think the difference is when you feel called to that hill, this is probably harder than anything I've ever done. But in fact, I'm glad you asked this question because I don't always feel this way, but I do feel like there's another yoke that's carrying me here. When I say this out loud, otherwise this climb would be, brutal, and it is hard, but there is a freedom. And I think everybody knows this. The more you step out in faith, I think the more that God becomes real in your life. And so I'm trying to live in it on a day-to-day basis. So I've no means have I licked it. So I always appreciate prayers and your support. But I will say the journey is, and the path that we are on, that I'm on today, my family's on today. So grateful, even in the midst of struggling.
I love it. There's a guy named Nick Scott who's not very happy. Nick, we appreciate your passion, and we're not going to read what Nick shared because it's not kind. But Nick, we appreciate your passion, but we on this particular podcast, it's about a positive approach to the situation, and not necessarily an angry approach to the situation, because your approach, I'm sorry, my friend, is not going to help. Now, but let's now talk about solutions, Jeff.
Yep.
So you. As a result of what you did, you went into a space called impact investing.
Right.
So let's talk about economics, because they're talking about police reforms. They're talking about justice reforms. But in reality, at the end of the day, and you said, if there's no economic reform, then because at the end of the day, it was over $20 counterfeit, right? And you mentioned the people who you've met in prison who had different socioeconomic realities. They may not be there, right? So let's talk about, first, to our audience, what is impact investing?
Right.
And that strategy, can that approach to investing be a part of a solution for urban reform? If you want to look at it in terms of how do we create a lift for those who are disadvantaged economically as a part of the solution?
I mean, part of the reason why I'm doing this now, because I absolutely believe it is part of the solution. So impact investing, what is it? Well, it's this idea, and there's several definitions, but for this discussion, we make it fairly simplistic. It's this idea of not only investing for financial return, but also investing to drive impact or real measurable results in other things such as environmental, such as social as well. So an example would be, we've done a fair amount in affordable housing, and I won't go through all the statistics and all that around there, but I think most people understand housing across the board is extremely expensive, and specifically on the lower end, it's eating up people's income. And so are there ways to invest into that to create safe, clean, affordable housing for residents, lifting them up while also producing a return? And so that would be an example. I'll tell you another example that is really powerful is, and some of you may have heard about it, they're called opportunity zones. This is a structure that was set up in the 2017 Tax Reform Act. It's just now getting legs, but it essentially was created by a bipartisan. So here's a policy decision that was looking at the economic rebound of the United States since about 2000, and I think it was, well, since the global financial crisis. And what they noticed was that certain areas were not getting capital and not flourishing, others were. And so how do you go in and solve this? And ultimately it's a government policy that says investors, private capital, if you invest in these areas, we're going to give you some tax incentives. Now, the way that they structured it is in such a way that it's not all tax driven. So it doesn't, the goal is not to throw stupid money out there and just waste money. Instead, it's let's create sustainable business opportunities, and we'll give you some incremental benefit on the taxation side. And so it's a dual mandate. How do you make some money, and how do you uplift some of these communities? So those are real life things that policy has created, bipartisan, that we should be figuring out how to get more and more capital in there for both, a win-win, to make money and to uplift these communities. And so this is a world I live in today, and I could give you example after example where this stuff is happening, which is another reason why this dialogue is so hard to hear, because it's dismissing. There's tons of people trying to solve these issues. And I mean, again, the stories I could tell you, people are fighting this battle day to day, trying to, for the whole cause of human flourishing. And here's the last thing I'm going to say on that. What's interesting is attacking it this way from an impact perspective really ignites creativity and innovation, way more than I have seen at times in traditional finance. So that's why I get so excited about mixing your head and your heart from an investment perspective, not just for the investor, but also for those where the capital is directly impacting.
One of our guests, Jeff, talked about the importance of government's role, and suggested that yes, the private sector is critical, but unless government gets involved, or unless government plays a role, that it would not be comprehensive. What are your thoughts there?
Well, let me start it by saying this. People may disagree on methodology to fix these problems, but I think if we got in a room with most people, they would agree with what at least the problems are that we're trying to solve. And so while people may disagree on these, just know that, look, I think most people agree that here's the issues and we want to solve them. I would tell you that I think government clearly should be involved. I think they should set policies like the opportunity zones, and then let the I don't want to say let the markets take over. I think if they set policy right, they're going to infuse way more capital and heart than the government. One of the problems I have with government fixing these problems is government is not necessarily there's not necessarily a heart behind it. It's a mandated thing. Whereas if you get people who come together around a policy and they are driving this, not only are they putting their own time, their own money, but there's a heart behind it that I think is needed. So for example, in impact investing, it's not simply money that solves these problems. Clearly you got to have money in there, but if you don't have the heart behind it, you're going to end up not in a healthy spot. So I tend to err on, there definitely needs to be government involvement. I don't think the government fixes all these problems. And I'm a guy who thinks that the government can step in too much. But now we get into political debates on that. I just can tell you, I've seen firsthand investors who are willing and who want to be a part of the solution with their own capital. And mind you, impact investing is not just at the individual level. You are seeing impact investing done in fact, where it started is in the foundation and institutional world. So not only is capital being funneled into this just from us, it's from there's much bigger money behind it than simply individual investors. So I do think it's a valuable part, while I think the government also needs to be involved.
I love it. So what I'm hearing you say is that part of this, if we're going to look at a comprehensive transformative solution for our urban communities, we've got to look at government creating policy and incentivizing the capital market to make capital available in a different way, in the way that brings about transformation, job creation. And impact investing can be a vehicle to facilitate that, or at least a language system that will happen. So,
well, and Patrice, to that point, if you go back in America's history, you'll actually see policy that was very hurtful to the Black community and other communities. And so policy absolutely matters. I am not one who says, forget about the government, we'll figure it all out. No, you need both working in tandem. And in fact, I love this idea when there's, and I could go on for hours on this, where there's partnership between public governments and whatnot and private sector. One of the things that having the private sector involved is it actually oftentimes provides more accountability. And so there are things called green bonds that, and I can't go into the details now, but essentially it's a public-private partnership. And one of the attributes that's very helpful is you use government money, but you're able to put more parameters on accountability, so money just isn't being thrown around and not actually driving results. I mean, go figure. That's what we need. We need results right now. We don't just need good hearts. We need results.
I love it. Jeff, as we've come to wrap here, somebody's listening to us, they're an investor or they're an entrepreneur. They're saying, I like that. What can I do, Jeff, to get involved in impact investing so that I can be part of the solution?
Yeah. So the simplest way for an investor to get involved, you're going to hear or see the acronym ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Those are screens that analysts and different agencies, the way they rate public companies. So if you invest in a mutual fund, for example, you can go after a mutual fund that is screening from an environmental, social, and governance perspective. That's probably the easiest way. And then there are, in the world that we live in, is private opportunities. Go to your local financial advisor. They should be able to at least point you in the right direction. And another resource that I point to you is actually a friend of mine. He has, and I don't know the website off the top of my head, but it's Faith Driven Investors, FDI, and they have a bunch of resources out there promoting impact investing with a spiritual lens as well. But I would tell you, type in the words on the internet, go check it out. You'll actually be amazed at some of the creative opportunities and things that people are doing to try to make a difference in the world and in human flourishing.
I love it. So as we wrap up here, Jeff, we've got a Brian who's hopeful, and a Nick who's not as hopeful. As a matter of fact, Nick is mad. So do you have hope? Why not?
I do have hope. And the hope is not in anything in myself. I believe that God is sovereign and his hand is in this. Despite at times it's hard to reconcile the two. And then if you just go back to some basic stuff, and this is why, and again, I'm in my world here, and I'm in the world of what you do. Having jobs, valuing work in a different way, gives me hope. And I'm going to close on this. I don't know how much time we have, but so I was helping with in a Colorado prison. And we were helping these were incarcerated men who had been in there for about 25 to 30 years. They were going to be released, so they thought, in the next year to 2 years. And we were helping them work through resumes. So try putting together a resume for a guy who's been in prison for 25 years. Wow. And one of the things that quickly becomes clear is these guys in these prison systems, they want work. They understand the value of work. And so one of the things is when I left that day, and we were role playing with these inmates, I went back to one of them, and just because I felt prompted to, and I said, when you get out, because by the way, when do you bring up in an interview that you've been incarcerated for X amount of years? Mm-hmm. And here's what I told him. I said, just remember, when you come out, which by the way, he's out now. And in fact, he found me on LinkedIn and commented to me about how powerful this comment was. And all I did was sharing with something that came to my head. But I said, when you're in a job interview, despite your past, despite what you do or don't have on your resume, all you have to tell this employer is you understand the value of work. You understand that you were made to work. There's a joy in working. And he found me on LinkedIn and he said, Jeff, ever since you shared that with me, and I'm not taking any credit for it, he goes, you've changed my whole perspective. And so I take that one little instance and go, here's somebody who is in theory hopeless. He'd been in prison for 25 years. He had very few skills and very few jobs that he could talk about. But the one thing he could go talk to potential employers about is, you know what? I understand the value of work. And it was like, that's why I have hope in the context of God's in control of all this.
Wow. Jeff, you were a blessing, my friend. Thank you so much. And thank you for risking and coming here and sharing. You know what, Brian, Nick, I hope you were encouraged. And a number of you out there who are listening, watching this via Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or even YouTube, or even the various podcast channel. Thank you so much for watching. Listen, if you enjoy this, share it. And Nick, I encourage you not to share it, but also go listen to our other podcasts, because you'll be amazed at the various perspectives that people are sharing and the solution orientation. Let's use as a catalyst for change, and as a catalyst for community, and as a catalyst for transformation. You know, I think the Bible teaches us, Nick, I don't know if you're a Christian or not, the Bible teaches us what the devil means for evil, God uses it for good. So we're not going to F George Floyd, but we're going to thank God for George Floyd and use this opportunity for the good that we know to do. Having said that, as you know, Nehemiah, this is part of Nehemiah Response. We're not only doing these kind of podcasts, but we also are committed through the Journey to Freedom, a redemptive conversation around race and justice. If you're not getting our devotionals, that comes out every Monday. Do get them. Just go to our website and sign up for them so you can be part of these conversation and get inspired, encouraged by them. We're giving you tools on how to have these kind of dialogue. This week, we talked about the dream. On Monday, we're going to talk about the betrayal. You're going to learn something. Hey, slavery did not start with white Americans, nor did it even start with Europeans. Slavery has been a cancer for the human soul for over 11,000 years, right? And also, by the way, if we're going to blame the white Americans for slavery, the Black Africans must also take responsibility, because it didn't start with Blacks being stolen. It began with Blacks being sold, right? It was a betrayal of humanity. And so that's part of our Monday's devotional. Please get those so you can learn more and be equipped, so you can think about this from a perspective that is redemptive and that challenges all of us to take responsibility. Also, we are expanding our urban initiative. Thanks to people like, by the way, Jeff, thank you, because people like yourself and others have helped us during COVID-19 and has been instrumental to allowing us not only to do this, but to do many other things, making what we do available to those the underserved. And so Charles Kears will be leading our urban impact vision. Well, our aim is to provide entrepreneurship education and job creation for urban entrepreneurs, and then also partner with other leaders in the urban community to bring speakers like Jeff and to encourage and inspire and to be able to provide jobs and entrepreneurship education. So that's our commitment. You do something, share this with as many folks as you can, so that we can change the narrative, so that we can be inspired to do something in this moment of opportunity. Having said that, may the Lord bless you. May the Lord enable you to steward the talents He's placed under your care in such a way that you might hear those wonderful words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. He'll now make you rule over much." God bless you. Don't leave yet, because we want to invite you to Nehemiah Week. Check this video out. Nehemiah Week is an annual event designed to equip entrepreneurs and leaders from around the world, to inspire and to honor marketplace leaders for their accomplishments and what they're doing to model Christ in the marketplace.
God is doing incredible things at Nehemiah Week.
Ladies and gentlemen, God has called us to be a light for Him, to be an example for Him, to be a model for Him, so that as others see us, not hear us, but see us, they can see a model of Christ.
Yeah, each year at Nehemiah Week, we gather the nations.
Our vision is to transform the marketplace with the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, one entrepreneur at a time.
We have learned to do business in a godly way. I will actually spread this to our church as well.
Through the course of Nehemiah Week includes information around principles of biblical entrepreneurship, so really looking at biblical economics.
What we've learned this week is about training. Nehemiah project is about training and then coaching and then accessing capital.
Nehemiah gave me a godly vision. Really impacts the way that I see doing business.
Nehemiah Week not only gives birth to new ideas, it connects us with resources and relationships that makes them possible.
So what we want to do is not just affect here in the U.S. We want to take this curriculum all over the world.
Whatever it is, the question is, what impact will this have on others?
It's something that's going to change lives. So I'm ready to use whatever I have for the benefit of the kingdom of God.
I believe that the nations are going to shake because of this week. Biblical entrepreneurship takes a stand to say we are going to be witnesses for Jesus Christ in the marketplace.